We're back here in Cameron Park getting an update at Chuck Wall's Vulture Row Aviation on the Corsair build. Not only this rare birdcage Corsair, but several other Corsair restorations that are going on simultaneously. Let's check it out. So right now he's working on about 7 different Corsair aircraft here in the shop today. Well, it's been a while. Let's get an update on Chuck's birdcage Corsair. He's working on this a little bit on his own while the employees are working on restorations for other customers. We'll start with the R2800 Pratt & Whitney radial engine, the Dash 8 model. This is one of the very early models of the 2800, and apparently the 2800 was first tested in the Corsair. A 2 or 3 stage blower back here. Neutral, low, and high. The engine cowlings that we looked at are going to mount here. Cowl flaps are going to mount here. Here's the backside of your exhaust shroud, stainless steel. Fortunately, this is original, and then this piece is hand formed new to create the exhaust shroud. Here we're looking at the firewall forward of the birdcage with an original 20-gallon oil tank for the birdcage Corsair. Of course, the brand new center section and spar, and here's where a whole lot of additional plumbing is going to have to take place for both fuel and oil, plus all the coolers and doors and everything else associated with that. Now the fuselage center section has had a lot more work done to it since last time we reported on this. He's getting all the plumbing in here for fuel. The fuel is done. Hey, there's that fuel piece we were talking about. And the hydraulics are getting done. And remember, it's going to be, of course, a folding wing hydraulic design. All the flaps have been mounted. These flaps alone take a couple of years to build, like 22 of these individual flap panels. We'll come back and take a closer look at this here in a moment. But here's the tail section that's going to be bolted on to here. Chuck's adding all the detail to the original looking cockpit interior here. There's your instrument panel. A lot of your different crazy controls as part of the Corsair. Looks like landing gear, dive brakes, throttle quadrant, flaps, trims, elevator, rudder, ailerons, bomb release. What else have we got here? Emergency gear extension. Hydraulic pressure, fuel, amps, G meter, electrical panel here. All of the details going into this restoration. Of course, the rudder pedals, air vent, and look at the hydraulic lines all properly marked. Here's your fuel selector valve and handle, chain to drive all that. Just an incredible amount of detail. Here's a fascinating bit of trivia about the Corsair. You see the landing gear down lever and the placarded 200 knot limit on the landing gear, and then the separate dive brake controls. And we've talked about this before. Remember, on the Corsair, it's the panels on the front of the landing gear legs which are your dive brakes. In other words, your main landing gear are your dive brakes, but there was a limit on the tail wheel, and that's that 200 knot limit on the tail wheel. So if you need to get out of a scrap in a hurry, or you need to dive bomb as vertically as you can, you would lower the dive brakes, which would extend the main gear only. And when you come into land, of course, you lower the landing gear using the landing gear lever, which lowers the main gear and the tail wheel. So because of that tail wheel speed limit, they had to have a separate dive brake control for the main gear / dive brakes. And check out that airspeed indicator. It goes twice around in knots. Looks like the first dial winds it up to 200 miles an hour, or correction, 200 knots, and then it wraps all the way up to 430 knots. Here's the dive brake portion of the landing gear we were talking about. The landing gear would be down here, and this big panel here would be your dive brake, bolted right on to the landing gear, main landing gear leg. And there's some additional gear door parts down there. Dive brakes. Landing gear and wheels, some assembly required. Now let's get underneath the center section of the Birdcage Corsair into the right-hand landing gear wheel well. And look at the incredible detail going into this. All of the hydraulic lines, fuel lines, electrical cabling, all coming into play now. See how the hydraulic lines are color-coded? Sequencer valves for the landing gear. Of course, your brand new spar running right through there. Part of your center section, kind of looking at the back side of it. And look at even down to the wiring with the original markings on the wiring. Just an incredible level of detail. We were talking about the wiring down below there. Here's the original wiring, 80-year-old or plus wiring for the Corsair, and here's the new wiring which matches the original, but check out the drawing here. So to get your wiring to match the original schematic so you can troubleshoot it, you got to label each individual wire, and Chance Vought would just put a bit of this tape or this marker at each end, the termination end of each wire, to indicate what number wire it was and where it was on the schematic, as opposed to North American, which would mark the wires every so many inches with a number. So get your magnifying glass out and start wiring your Corsair. And here's the canopy that gives the aircraft the namesake Birdcage Corsair. It's this birdcage style canopy of the early model Corsairs. They give it its name because, of course, later they came up with the big plexiglass bubble canopy for the greater visibility. You've got room up on top there for your head, so you can even change your mind. Now let's go take a look at some of the other projects going on in the shop. Here's a set of wings to be restored fresh from the South Pacific. These are F4U-1 Alphas. As Chuck reminds us, these, before the 1Ds, they had fuel tanks, auxiliary fuel tanks in the wings, and they later went to drop tanks. And remember, part of these wings are fabric covered, and here's the little clips that holds the fabric onto the ribs in lieu of rib stitching. And these were a whole pile of wings collected out of the South Pacific. So the Corsair out there in the field today, known as Lucky Gallon, these wings are going on Lucky Gallon. I asked Chuck what happened to the wings of Lucky Gallon. Lucky Gallon was the famous racing airplane from back in the Cleveland Air Races, and it was abandoned basically, and the wings were missing. Somebody took off with the wings, so in order to restore the Lucky Gallon, they got to get these wings set up for it. Here's a set of wings to a 1D Corsair that are being restored. You can tell the original parts that are chromated and have the original rivet holes in them, and then the new parts going in have not yet been drilled. So parts like this, brand new skins, and a lot of Clecos. Of course, the Clecos is what fastens the parts together temporarily until you get it riveted together. And here's how you start this whole process. You get the original blueprints by hook or by crook from the Smithsonian or wherever, but you got to start with these original blueprints and then start working from there. And then you get a existing Corsair wing and you build a jig to match that wing. You get one good straight wing, jig that wing, and now you can recreate additional wings from that one good jig, or recreate that jig multiple times over. Same thing with the fuselage and the fuselage jig. But it all starts with a good set of drawings. Now, it's wartime, and when they're printing these prints up, everything's moving really fast. There's a lot of errors and mistakes on these prints. So in order to do the kind of work they're doing here today, they really need to have an original aircraft, a completed aircraft, and compare the completed aircraft to the notes on the drawings. There is a lot of errors in the wartime drawings. Probably a lot of young kids right out of school, like my dad, working on that too. Some parts in the paint booth here. It looks like zinc chromate, but it's really epoxy primer. And is that what's getting hand brushed on here too?
Yeah, he's brushing on the back side where the spray gun won't go.
Oh yeah, got
Before
it.
he sprays everything.
Painstaking details. So here you'll see a combination of yellow epoxy and traditional dark green zinc chromate epoxy. Well, when you open up the ammo cans, you want to see the traditional dark zinc chromate colored epoxy primer in your restoration. Some of the things you find in an old Corsair. Oh, something happened there. So now you see a change in color from the traditional zinc chromate color to this salmon colored primer. When you get into the salmon colored primer, you know you're working with a birdcage Corsair, a really early model Corsair. This was the color of the primer for those model of aircraft. Now the early model Corsairs used wing tanks or wet wings, and this is the inside of a wet wing of a birdcage Corsair. And if you've ever built an RV aircraft before, built your own fuel tanks, you'll be familiar with this Pro Seal, and you got to rivet each rivet wet with Pro Seal, and that stuff gets all over everything. So the inside of this part of the wing will be filled with about 58 gallons fuel. Later model Corsairs, after the 1 Alphas, I believe, they began to go to the drop tanks. So they got rid of this complicated wet wing design, and they just went with the drop tanks. And each Corsair had a big, well, they got a fuselage tank in between the engine and the cockpit. And because the birdcage Corsair is so rare, a lot of these parts are all brand new manufactured, including these wing spar assemblies. Here's the drain sump for a wet wing Corsair on the bottom of the wing. And underneath here is your fuel filler on the top of the wing. And of course the wings on the Corsair fold, and so you've got these crazy angles here to create the pivoting outboard portion of the wing. These are just the bolts that hold it into the jig, the wing jig for now. And these brackets here are going to hold the ammo boxes, so you're going to access your ammo bay right here, and that's going to be the top wing skin. So a lot of the millions of little brackets and bits are original with the part numbers on there, restored, but a lot of parts you got to make from brand new, like these fuel parts here, because the original parts are just not airworthy. Look at this, here's some ammo boxes, and here's some gun barrel blast tubes where the 50 cals would stick out of here. Augmenter tubes for your guns. This is an accessory cowl door. It kind of works in conjunction with the cowl flap, showing Kellen how that thing drops down. When you shut the engine down, that opens up and it helps get cooling air through the aircraft. But anyways, this is an original part, and from this original part they're going to get the specs. They're going to basically take this thing all apart, get all the dimensions, put it into SolidWorks, and then begin to recreate additional new components for this particular part, so they can build a number of these components, but they got to start with an original piece. Back that up with the drawings and then feed it into SolidWorks and then start spitting out new parts from there. Because each one of these is different, and of course it's all got to be spot welded. So here we are in SolidWorks, and here's what the component looks like when you begin drawing it up. And from this, you can begin to build parts with it once you got the drawings completed. So here's an individual part off of SolidWorks that he's drawn up. It's going to go into, what did you call that software?
SurfCam.
SurfCam, and from the SurfCam creates the code to feed the CNC machine, which can then create the dies, which you can then begin to stamp out the parts from. Oh, okay, there goes the there's the process of stamping your part. Right there, so you got the male and female mold. And you're machining these molds out of aluminum billet? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're not doing
hundreds of parts, so
yeah,
and it holds up enough for what we're doing.
Good. And here's your 4-axis CNC machine. You plug the data from your drawings into here, and you can start milling them out by the hundreds. So as you remember, the Corsair had 350 caliber guns per side, 1,175 rounds, and these are the chutes that fed those rounds. Okay, here's some brand new stainless steel ammo feed chutes, feeding the ammo, and they had to start with a original piece, and we're going to show you the jig here in a second. So how do you get these shapes? You come over here and you have to build a jig, and if you pop it open, there's the shape that you're looking to achieve right there. Put that in a hydraulic press, smash it down with a few thousand pounds, and you've got your stainless steel part here that is then subsequently spot welded together. Ammo chutes, stainless steel. So if you make enough of these, if you're going to make one, you might as well make one for the entire fleet. So they'll have 160 of these, or about 10 planes worth of feeder boxes in stock in inventory. Come and get them. A lot of the parts on the Corsair were fabric covered. Here's the rudder department, and here's an original rudder here. Here's the fabric removed from a rudder that's getting restored. And over here is the rudder rebuilding center. So you got a lot of original parts in here, and then a lot of new parts that need to be made. And you got your rudder jig holding it in position here, but a lot of these ribs need to be built from new. So again, you start with that dead soft aluminum, and you hand form the angles of this rib over a wood block. Now the early model Corsairs had the lightning holes, and then the later model Corsairs went with these stiffener dimples. We'll go show you how they make these dimples in the ribs next. So here we're going to make some rudder ribs out of 2024 dead soft O aluminum 032 gauge, and he's got his dies here, and he's going to press these dimples into the ribs like this. There's the die that's gone through the whole SolidWorks process and created. Probably an original press from back in the day. So dead soft aluminum means it's very malleable at this point.
Get it right on the money. Okay, now.
He's got his marks lined up right there. And this, what is this telling us? The amount of pressure you're putting on it?
No, it tells me how far I'm going.
How far down?
Yeah,
All
I
right.
mapped out where my uppermost limit is and my lowermost limit is.
Got it. And here's the original spec from the blueprints, giving you the spacing and the size of these dimples. And there's your finished stiffeners. It stiffens up the part. And it's made out of these molds right here. So that dead soft O aluminum needs to be brought up to spec of T4 hardened aluminum through this heating process. So you take your O aluminum, and to harden it, you got to heat treat it with your Lucifer oven right there after you've gotten done shaping it to the form you want.
920 degrees, anywhere from, depends on the thickness of the metal, it could be 20 minutes up to an hour.
Bake it 20 minutes to an hour, 920 degrees.
Then when it comes out, it has to quench in a quench tank immediately
To get the hardness, it's got to be quenched in the water. So today we're going to do a little spot welding review on this vertical fin to an F4U Corsair vertical fin. Check it out. A Dash 4 Corsair, one of the survivors from the soccer war Corsair collection. Remember the war in Honduras and El Salvador where they got those Corsairs out of there, and I believe, weren't those also in Baa Black Sheep? Maybe? I think so. Anyways, spot welding. All of these little bits here are going to be spot welded. They're only going to use flush rivets here on the ribs. These are original ribs, and a lot of the rest of these parts are remanufactured, and of course all new skin. In order to do this spot welding, we're going to use the big machine here. Let me see if I got my glasses on here. 21,000 amps for 55 milliseconds. You'll hear a little buzz through the metal, and that's your spot weld. Now that amperage and the time changes each day, so you got to do a test spot weld before you actually go to work on the actual piece, because if you get it wrong, you're going to blow a hole through the piece and ruin the entire priceless part. And though you change the amperage and the duration, the spacing of the spot welds is always the same right off of the spec, off of the blueprints. Very tight spacing. By the way, Chuck's electricity bill is about $2,500 a month running these machines. And so far to count, he's done 157,000 spot welds. Because a lot of the Corsair is spot welded. And the spot weld makes a perfectly flush joint. It's flush on both sides. And as far as the spacing goes, you're basically at this point just eyeballing it.
Well, that little part right there, there's actually a couple pieces stacked. So I was putting them there and trying to avoid the edge of the piece, because if you hit the edge of the third layer that's trapped in the middle there, it'll blow material out the side and you won't get a good weld.
Got it.
On any more of that area. Now though, I'm down to just two, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the end here. I'm going to have one on either end, and then just start putting them in the middle until I get the spacing that I want.
Okay.
Lift it up a little bit there, Lou.
Now he's going to work his spacing on the field in between where he left off and the end of the rudder, or vertical fin. You can just barely hear a little high frequency buzz or whine each time he hits the spot weld. And here you can see on this vertical fin, you're spot welding all of these hat sections in first before you insert the ribs. Lots of round parts in the Corsair that need to be formed. So here's the form that you eventually want the part to fit, and here's the stretch blocks here that's going to help you create this part. So you take your mold here, set it on the jacks there, grab a hold of the sides of the aluminum skin there, and then press the block up into the aluminum and begin to form this shape. And it's going to require some additional persuasion here with a hammer and a shot bag to get that perfect fit. Here's another example of rare and exotic parts. Here's a piece of the cowling that goes over the cylinder, one of the only original cowling pieces in existence. So from this, they're going to get all the dimensions to create new ones. See what I mean about all the curved parts in the aluminum? Here's a very tail cone of a D-D, the welded bit right in the middle. Here's the fuselage center section department. Here's Lucky Gallon's original skins, which have been drilled off and got the dimensions of. And then here you can see new skins, new ribs, original parts, as they got this kind of frosted colors. They've been blasted. So there you can see kind of the blend of new and original parts going into a fuselage center section. Of course, this will be the cockpit area right here. And here's where you can see it's jigged up, ready for the engine mount. And right here and here is where the gull wing spar is going to bolt onto, or the fuselage bolts onto the spar. Here's a brand new wing spar center section, the bent wing bird. And there's the salmon colored one for the bird cage over there. And if you've ever owned an old airplane, it's often the corrosion in the spars which ends up killing the airplane or the airframe. So here you can get a brand new one built from scratch. Here's a great example of the level of detail that goes into one of these restorations. These are the gun doors, the doors over the top of the wing to access the guns. These doors come in 3 parts. Here's an original one, a very rare original one. Here is a new one that has been, well, recreated. And so you've got this complicated latch and lever assembly. Here's a good example here that latches these kind of like an aircraft door. So you got to undo that Zeus fastener there, and then flip that handle up, and now you can turn the handle and open or close the pin that opens and closes the door. And of course, all of this, here's one under construction here in the jig, and all of this, all these ribs in here are spot welded initially. And since this is the salmon color, this is the bird cage color, and on the bird cage they've got these very unique fasteners early on, lock screw fasteners, threaded like a riv nut into here. Later model ones, they went in with the explosive rivets used right in here. Gun doors, multiple latches. Here's a latch that latches in 1, 2, 3, 4 places. Stainless steel, using that latch right there. One of the common questions is, why are the rivets blue? Well, Vought wanted maximum corrosion protection, so they had their rivets blue anodized. And if you have any questions, you can always reference the easy to follow instructions. Well, thanks again, Chuck, for the tour of the factory.
You're welcome.
Things are moving along here. And right now you got about how many employees?
Got about 8.
And if you know anybody that's specially skilled in this sort of quality restorations, come on down and see Chuck Wall here at Cameron Park. The work never ends. They don't make this easy, these Corsairs, do they?
No, not easy, but fun.
That's it. All right, thanks for watching. See you here.